This time in the Prop Master, well, we breathe a little life into this armor. And of course, now we have definitive proof that Boba Fett did escape the Sarlacc pit and lived to be old and fat. I am a bit more spice than most can handle. That's right, we finally get around to doing the aging and weathering on the armor. And that's really the process where we add all those little details that really take it from looking like a prop to looking like a real object. And there's a lot of different ways that you can go about aging and weathering something, and we're going to try most of them this time because I'm just not really sure, which ones are going to work the best at this point. But the most important thing to remember when you're doing aging as weathering is that no matter what technique you use, you're going to have to kind of give up some control and let the technique itself kind of do what it's going to do. If you try to control it too much, you're kind of getting artificial and it's going to start to fight against you and you're going to be in for a frustrating time. But if you just kind of relax and go with the flow and let it do its thing, it can almost guarantee you're going to be happy with the results at the end. But look, we've got the flight suit, the flak jacket, chest armor, shoulder armor, knee armor. It's just a lot of stuff. So we better get started. Okay, so I'm still waiting on some decals and some other things before I can really get to work on weathering the armor pieces themselves. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on some of the softer parts of Boba Fett's outfit. So you might be asking yourself, what's the big deal with weathering anyway? It already looks pretty good. And it does. Every time I look at the armor, I'm pretty impressed with the way it actually turned out so far. But it's the weathering that's really going to bring it to life. This is one of the little pocket pouches that hangs off of his belt. This is its normal, what it looks like right now. Sort of Boba Fett's first day at work. And, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just a little bit sterile. What we can do is this. And this is Boba Fett after, a month on Tatooine. And it's got varying amounts of weathering. It's not the same all over. But this is the kind of effect that we are looking for. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do this. To weather these little pouches, you're primarily going to want some of this raw sienna. It's really going to give you that sort of Tatooine sand appearance. You can get a very similar effect from the burnt umber. It's just a little bit darker. You can do both of them, but if you're just going to do one, I'd suggest the raw sienna. You'll also want some of this raw umber, and of course black. This is just the Mars black. You could also get away with the ivory black. It'll just take a little bit more of the ivory black. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take a cup, your solo cup. You don't need much, there's a little bit of water still in here, but you get a little glob about that size, and then you're not going to put very much water in here, especially not at first. Just a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and stir that up. Just got a end of an old brush here. If you just put a lot of water in there, it'll take forever to actually get this stuff to mix up. In fact, the less water than this would have been even better. add a little more water to that. So we're not talking a whole lot of water here. And I'm just going to pour that into a spray bottle. You probably want to go ahead and buy several spray bottles just because they're all going to work a little bit differently. Definitely different types work a little differently. I bought this at Home Depot, and I was going to say this isn't a particularly good one because it seems to have basically two. You get either a very fine mist, or almost instantly it goes to a stream. There's not much in between, but it does seem to be very clean, which means when you're on mist, you basically get a nice mist, which does come in handy. This type, which I also bought at Home Depot, but years ago, you have a little bit more things you can do with it. It's from a fine mist through a sort of a middle ground and then to a stream. The problem with it is that no matter what, I seem to get splatters from it. On the finest mist, it's still little droplets of paint get here and then get sprayed onto it. So it's really good for more of a splatter effect. So for the all sort of even covering colors, like through here, I used this sprayer. Where I got these splatters, I used this other sprayer. Now, that's not to say that it's a brand thing, it's just the individual spray bottle itself. So, you'll have to get a couple versions and, just kind of compare them. Even if they're the same brand, they may act differently. But they're not particularly expensive, so it's good to, buy 2 or 3 of them just to see which ones act different ways. So let's go ahead and pour our color into the bottle. So if you're looking for a ratio on paint to water, I'd say maybe that was a teaspoon of acrylic paint and maybe a cup of water. Would be a pretty good ratio. So I have it in here. And it's always a good idea to start on the back of something like this. So the very first thing that you start doing this with is not really going to show. It'll give you a chance to kind of figure out what you're doing. I've just got an old towel and I'm going to squirt this into an old towel a few times to get it to where it's spraying. And I'm going to start out by just doing some stream on a tight stream. I'm just going to try to hit these little edges. I'm going to miss a lot, but that's okay. Now I'm going to switch it over to more of a spray. And then I'm going to stop with that. I'm going to clean up my mess a little bit. So once you've got this done, I'm just going to get a hair dryer. And I'm just going to dry this off. You do this in multiple layers like this, you can kind of see more what's going to happen. The color is different when it dries than it is, when it's still wet here. Okay, I kind of like the way that looks. I wish I get a little bit darker in through here, so I'm going to try to avoid the center area because I like how it's, less weathered here and more around the outsides. I'm going to mix up some of this burnt umber. It's just a little bit darker color. Very similar, but just darker. So I'm going to mix up. It's so similar that I think if I add the same amount of water, you really won't notice a difference. So I'm going to add a little bit less water. Now that I have that mixed up, I'm going to just not put as much water in there. And hopefully that'll be a strong enough color that it'll be a little darker than this. This is a third spray bottle that I have not tried yet, so we'll see what this one does. So hopefully this won't get too out of hand. The downside of using so little water is that the spray bottle can't reach the water very well. I'm gonna have to add a little more water. Okay, let's see. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my other bottle. Okay, so let's dry this off and see what it looks like. I'm afraid that might have been a little extreme, which is one of the reasons why I'm trying this on the back. So it's not that bad, but it's definitely more than I was really trying for. So let's try adding quite a bit more water to that. Get this a little bit closer to that first ratio. Okay, I'm gonna go with a mist. It's still pretty dark, but it's not as dark as it was. As you can see, this is kind of just, you know, a little bit of trial and error. Just do a little bit, dry it off, do a little more. If you don't let it dry off, it tends to blend together a little bit better. Whereas if you let it dry, it gets a little bit more depth of color, so you can play with that as well. So if I hadn't let this dark dry so much, and I put the lighter version on it, it would have blended more, which would probably be a good thing. But in general, by letting it dry, you end up making it look like it's, you know, been out in the weather. You've been, you know, it's gotten dirty several different times. So I think I know what I want to do as far as that color is concerned now. I think I never should have made this so concentrated. I should have done the two different colors and pretty much just kept with the, you know, roughly 1 tablespoon of paint to, you know, a cup of water. The next color I'm going to mix up is going to be a combination of the raw umber with just a little bit of this black added to it, just to get a little bit darker, a little bit grayer. And these two color combinations are pretty much 99% of what you see, at least on the Return of the Jedi. So I'm starting out with the raw umber, and I'm just going to put that same basic amount that I've been doing. And I'm going to add just a little bit of this black to it. Just about the smallest amount that I can get to drip off the end. Let's try a little different. I'm going to try to get this kind of mixed up before I add any water to it at all. I'm just going to add just a little bit of water to that. And I'm going to go ahead and add that to my spray bottle. This is my spray bottle that splatters quite a bit. Okay, I'm just going to give it a little splattering like that. And then you know the drill. Let's dry it off. Well, you know what? Before we do that, let's go ahead and adjust this to a very fine mist. Let's see if we can't get a little bit more. But you see what I mean? Even on that fine mist, I get a lot of splatter. So from the looks of this, especially this right up here, I'm going to add some more water to my paint. It's still just a little bit concentrated. Okay, so it's a bit much, but I like the general effect of it. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of this pouch. And just like I did before, I'm going to start off with the sandier color, and I'm going to hit the edges more than anything else. And I'm going to get this in here a little bit as well. And I want to get some of this as well. You can kind of see some of these spots like here and right across here. That might have come in from when I was spraying, but like this corner here, that's from it rubbing on this on the ground here because I've been spraying onto it. So that's not really what I'm meant to do, but at the same time, you know, it doesn't bother me because, you know, I'm trying to dirty this up, so it's dirty. So now we have that color down. Let's go ahead and hit it with the darker just a little bit. And I'm going to do just sort of, I'm going to hit a little bit of this lid part here so it'll be different from underneath. I'm going to do these corners. Let me see if I can hold this up a little bit. This is more like the way you want to be doing it. I want the sides to be a little bit different than the front. But once again, I'm mostly just kind of running along the edges. So now we'll go ahead and dry this off. It's a little intense. I think the problem that I'm having right now is that I just don't have enough water in my colors. So I went ahead and added quite a bit more water to all of them. That way it'll be a bit more subtle, because that's just a little bit, it doesn't look so bad on film, but it's a little bit intense, or a little bit just dark. Saturated, I guess is the word I'm looking for, in real life. So now I have the darker mix of black and raw umber. Let me make sure this is on mist. So I'm just going to hold this. Once again, I'm concentrating on the edges. If I get further away, maybe it won't splatter quite so badly. I'm going to go ahead and dry that and see what that looks like. Okay, so here's the one we just did compared to the one that I did yesterday. And here's the differences between the two of them so you can see how to affect things. This is much redder, more sandy colored because I didn't have enough water in that paint. This one is more splotchy and splattery because I didn't have, or maybe I had too much water in the darker gray mix. I'm not sure that I necessarily want, feel like I need to have all the splatters that I could have on here. So I'm not really going to adjust anything for that. Plus they're on, they're two different things. When we actually do the flight suit itself, we'll be doing it all at once, so we won't have to worry about matching anything up. One thing I do want to do to both of these is I want to just sort of darken up this area down here where, repeated handling of this one area to open the flap is going to get it dirtier than everything else. So I'm going to darken this area and this area using the that color, the darker gray color. I'm going to get reasonably close because I don't want it everywhere. I'm going to hit some more splatters on this side. I know I said it didn't really matter to me much, but apparently I lied. And I might have to do this several times since it's so diluted, but we'll do that if we have to. We don't want this one to be, you know, for this area here, we don't want it to be all concentrated. We want it to look like, you know, years of just handling that one part. Okay, so it's all dried off now, and it looks pretty good. Definitely have this sort of little dark area where, you know, you've been touching it more than anywhere else. The reason why I did part of this with the flap up and part of it with it down is so that now there's a difference between the two. That may be a little extreme. I may go in and hit that a little bit, but that's the effect I'm looking for. I think I may go ahead and just do that a quick hit from here. Notice somehow the first shot always seems to be about 3 times the volume of all the rest of them. Okay, so I think that'll take care of it. Okay, I'm happy with that. And I don't remember if I actually mentioned anything about why I have these little foam blocks cut out in here. Because I'm not going to do that when I'm actually wearing the suit. But by having something that's the right shape, and we're repeatedly wetting this down and then drying it off, this kind of shape actually starts to, you know, the fabric begins to remember this shape. And so even when this foam is not in here, it's going to kind of keep that kind of a shape, and it's not going to just be a floppy bag, you know, like a raindrop kind of shape. And I have a way to emphasize that a bit more. In fact, we can probably go ahead and do that now because I think we're done with this and we can go ahead and move on to the rest of the suit. Okay, so I have the foam out, and see, as you can see, it's already gotten to where it sort of remembers that shape, and it's no longer a rounded shape. This is just a piece of cardboard. I cut it 2 inches wide and roughly 20 inches long. I just folded it so that it would be the right dimensions here. And I'm putting this in here just so I can get as crisp a corner as I can get. And put the foam back in here. Okay, so now once I have this the way I want it, I've just got some spray starch for ironing shirts. This is professional strength, so you know, whatever you got. I'm sure you can use whatever you have. If you don't have anything, you know, buy the strongest hold that you can find. Shake it up good, and then I'm just going to saturate. I'm mostly going to be concentrated on the sides and the bottom, maybe just a little bit of the front, you know, right at the edge. I didn't know how this might affect the color, so that's why I didn't do it before we added the color. Now that the color is on here, I'm not, you know, too worried about it messing anything up. It's a little extreme, but you make sure you get enough on there. And then I'm going to dry this off. The cardboard has the added benefit of, since it's printed on, I can see through the fabric to see it. So when the fabric is wet, it's transparent or translucent, and when it dries, it'll be opaque and I won't be able to see any of that. Okay, so now it's dry. I should be able to pull all this stuff out of here. And now it most definitely holds that shape really well. So even when it's empty, you know, it still looks more like a Star Wars pouch than just a bag of fabric. So let's go ahead and go on to the rest of the flight suit. It's surprising how silly the flight suit and everything looks without the armor pieces on it. I'm going to do basically the same thing as we did with the little pouches. The big difference being is that this is gray instead of tan. So it is going to be a little bit different. We'll probably have to go a little bit heavier with the color, but we'll see. And right now I have all of the cloth pieces on here, including this neck piece, the flak jacket, flight suit, the spats at the bottom. These arms may get in the way. I'm not really sure at this point. Maybe I'll push them backwards. Yeah, this is the raw sienna. And I have everything on here because I want to know, you know, what gets covered up. I'll come back afterwards and I'll take this off so that I can get access to some of the other pieces and hit it with just a little bit different treatment. Just in case there's ever a time where something gets pulled up or something like that. I don't want there to be a clean line. Now, with the Return of the Jedi flight suit and the way it's weathered, it seems to be the higher up you go, it's more sand colored, you know, more this colored, and then it gets more of a dark gray to a black the further down you go. So I think the thing to do is just to get started. So first I'm just kind of in general, just kind of shooting everything. I want to get some of the sides here as well. Okay, let's start off with that and we'll see how that dries. By the way, you obviously don't need to have a mannequin. You can get away with just using a hanger and hanging this up. Or, you know, like I usually see it done, is you just, you know, hold the piece up and kind of spray it as you go. My main guess is for this gray, I'm probably going to have to mix up a lot more color into that water. I think by the time this starts to show up, it's going to be so diffuse that it's going to not really be very noticeable. I think if I had a gray sample to hold next to it, you'd be able to see that this was much warmer in color, but I think it's not going to look as much like dirt and things like that. So I think I'll probably, after I dry this, I'll take a look at it. But my guess is going to be we'll end up adding some more paint to that, to the colors, at least as far as this gray material goes. It actually looks like it's going to be pretty good, maybe for the white. But we'll see. Let's go ahead and take these arms off here. I think these are going to be more of a pain. If you do want a mannequin, by the way, I've got this on Amazon. It was like $65. There's no point in you watching this, so as soon as this is dry, I'll be back. Okay, so it's completely dry, and in the areas where I really hit it hard around those knee pockets, I'd say it's a little bit, you can see it just a little bit, not really that much. So I'm gonna go ahead and strengthen up that color, just like I did with the dark gray color. I've just mixed up some paint, the same as before. And I'm gonna take some of the water directly from the spray bottle, pour it in, mix this up, and then pour it back into the bottle. And hopefully with all this extra color, all this extra pigment, this will go ahead and show up a little better. Okay, we've got some new stronger color here, and we'll go ahead and see how this works. Now, if this is the Return of the Jedi with the gray, if you're doing the Empire Strikes Back where it is sort of a dusty blue gray color, I think it would probably be good to go ahead and do some of this sand color, but it looks like it's mostly just sort of that the raw umber and the Mars black mixed together. And it seems to be almost just sort of splotchy, but covered head to toe. You can always find reference pictures. So I'll start out by hitting these areas that I know need to get quite a bit, just in case it's too dark. Oh, by the way, you can see where I took the foam pads out of the little pouches and I put them into these so that I'll get that same sort of memory to the fabric. Okay, looks like I need to get some more in this sort of area here. And the arms get quite a bit. You don't want to coat it completely, I just want to get splotches. I think I'm going to cheat a little bit and I'll kind of darken in sort of this kind of a triangular shape here and make me look a little skinnier. And of course, let's look at the back as well. Okay, it looks like there's not all that much of the brown in the back. It's interesting, without the cod piece in this back, it's really kind of baggy back here. Once this is covered, I'm going to hit okay, I'll dry this off and we'll take a look at it. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that, which is a good thing, so I just ran out of paint. So now I've got the bottle of raw umber in black, and I'm looking at my pictures here, and it looks like it just gets kind of progressively darker down toward the feet with some little splotches along the thighs and arms. Okay, now that I have those splotches, I'm going to go to more of a mist. We'll take a look and see how that dries, and then from there I'll figure out where to go, if I need to mix up some darker color or if that's going to be good. It's getting pretty late, so I think I'll probably just wait overnight and take a look at it in the morning. The colors will definitely keep overnight. Just make sure that you, hopefully you can see this, yeah, just make sure you close up this nozzle good and tight, and it should definitely survive the night. Couldn't hurt to wipe off this end here. And we'll see how that looks in the morning, and we'll go from there. So it's morning, and to be honest, I cannot see where the dark gray is on here at all. I mean, I can definitely see where my sand color is, but I do not see any of the dark gray. So we're gonna have to strengthen up that color a bit. So just like I've done in the past, I've mixed up some more of my color, and I'm going to pour some of the diluted mixture into here. Get that all mixed up and then pour it back into the bottle. Okay, so I have an even stronger mixture now, and I'm going to do roughly the same things I did before. Get quite a bit under the arms. And more of a mist now. And I'm trying to go in with this kind of an angle from underarms, maybe a little bit up to the side here, down toward this area where the armor is. I'm just trying to get little splatters everywhere. Now, I'll just kind of set this to spray, or I'm sorry, to mist, and I'm getting more of a splatter just by barely touching the trigger, but kind of quick like that. They give me more splatters. I don't want to get too much up here because I want it to be really obvious that there's much more dark black down here than up here. Okay, let's let that dry and we'll see how that turns out. Okay, so it's dry now and it's better than it was, but it's still not quite there. I've also opened up the door so I've got a little bit better light. I think what we need to do now is just some sort of concentrated attention close up where I can spray some stuff and then dry it right there instead of trying to do the whole thing at a time. I'm just going to concentrate, plus I'm kind of getting low on paint here. So I'm just going to kind of concentrate on these areas down here. I don't want it to be solid coverage. And the idea is by doing this and then drying it off immediately, hopefully it'll kind of freeze the color in place and it won't just spread out to where there's nothing left. Okay, this definitely seems to be working, so. Okay. Yeah, that's definitely that's the look we're going for right there. So I'm going to hit a few more areas here and then we'll go on to the next step. Everything's dried up now and it's looking a lot better, but I still like to get a little bit more of just a black color into the very lowest part of the shin area. And I could go ahead and do the same thing I've been doing and just mix up some fairly concentrated black with the spray bottle, but in order for it not to get real diffuse, I'd have to go really concentrated with it, and I just don't have a lot of control, and I think it would probably be a lot easier to make a big mistake than to get it right. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of this Krylon Color Max. It's a flat black color. And that's why I have this cardboard up everywhere. I probably should have done that before, but I didn't. And I don't want to get this, and I'm not going to like spray directly on here. I'm going to come way back about 2 feet away, and I'm just going to do short little sprays so that it just kind of dusts onto here. And I'm really sort of aiming for this area down here. The big danger with this is that because it's going on so slowly and subtly, that you can actually build up more than you think you are before you know it. Needless to say, this is, I made sure this was completely dry. It's not wet at all with the acrylic paint that was on there. That's looking good now. So let's go ahead and do the backs as well. Don't forget the sides. I'm just trying to kind of go in between the legs. In the screenshots that I've seen, that looks like there's black in that area as well. Not too bad though. This just has a completely different look to it than the spray bottle method. So I wouldn't suggest just going with this method to do the whole thing. The spray bottle is going to give it a much more natural effect for the weathering. So this is nice for some aspects of it, like where I'm just trying to get some of this black in some areas, but you wouldn't want to try to do the whole thing this method, I don't think. That's exactly what I was looking for. I'm going to make sure that completely dries and then we can go on. Everything's good and dry, and I really like the way it looks. I really think the black gives a nice effect. It really has that sort of gear oil, fuel oil kind of sooty kind of a thing going. And overall, I'm pretty happy with it. So what we need to do now is go ahead and remove some of the stuff that's been covering up the flight suit. And we're going to get the spats as well. Plus I'm going to want to do a little bit of work on the spats when they're not on the part of the flight suit. Okay, so you'll notice the tan lines here, especially down at the bottom, and that's what I'm really trying to deal with. Now the black and the really dark gray, I feel like that's more of a environmental kind of a spray kind of a, you know, feel, whereas the redder, the sandier color stuff, that's more like soaked into the suit, more rubbed into the suit, so it's a little bit less superficial. So I want to go ahead and use more of that color to deal with these tan lines. And plus I've used up the other colors, and what I have left is this sort of medium darker sand color. So yeah, this is the burnt umber. And I don't need to get all of this. I just want to kind of hit these areas here, so if you bend over or whatever, you don't have this like line where it looks like this has never been dirtied at all. I just tested that and it was a mist. Sometimes I'm having to get really close in order for the color to really show up, so. Really trying to avoid some of these drips though. Okay, so I can actually see some of the reddish color up here. I don't know if you'll notice it if something moves there, so I'm going to try to get a little bit more splotchiness into this. Okay, so that's definitely looking like what I want. And like the reason why I'm going with the reddish color is I feel like that's more like, you know, he's in deep sand or going through a river or something like that, and you know that color can soak up behind the armor. Whereas this darker is more of a soot, and it's only good, you know, it's going to only go as far as it can hit. It's not going to get up underneath the vest. Let's go ahead and do this down here. And I think we're ready to start putting some armor back on, and then we can get on to weathering the armor itself. Well, here's the cape on the armor, and you know what? It looks pretty good. I'm quite pleased with that. What doesn't look pretty good are the elastic straps on the back of the knee armor. That gold has got to go. So I'm just going to take a silver Sharpie and see if I can take care of that. Yep, that looks just about right. I'll go ahead and take them off and do a little better job, but that's all it takes to fix those. So now let's go ahead and move on to the more obvious parts of the armor. Okay, so there are several techniques that you can use when you start weathering hard pieces like this, and we're going to kind of go through a bunch of them just because I'm not sure which one's going to work, you know, just right on this. And I'm primarily going to use some acrylic paints, just like it's the same acrylic paints that we used when we were doing the soft, you know, the flight suit. And incidentally, these are all the same Liquitex Basics 48 pack that I got when I was working on the Sabine Wren helmet. So, I mean, you buy something like that, it's not just for one project. It's going to last you for a very long time. And the colors that I'm going to start out with are going to be the same colors that I used for the flight jacket. It's going to be your umbers and your siennas. So I think I'm going to start out with the lightest color that I'm going to be putting on here, and that's some of this raw sienna. I've just got a little plastic clear little cup thing. I'm just going to put some of this in. Not very much, just I need some color in there. I don't want there to be a lot of water here because, you know, this is vertical, and if I put it on here, it's just going to run down. This technique's really a little better for if I removed this and laid it down horizontally, but even then it's got quite a bit of relief to it, so even then it's going to run a lot. I'm not really trying to dilute the color so much as just make it where it's not going to adhere right away. There'll be a little bit of time where I can wipe it off. Got some paper towels here, and I'm just going to sort of randomly select some areas and just kind of get it on there. Incidentally, you probably noticed the sticker on here. That's one of the things that I've been waiting on. I was really expecting it to be a one of those that you wet and slide off on there, but it's actually just a regular stick-on sticker. Which the only problem with that is it's got a little bit higher relief than I was expecting. So that didn't do a whole lot. I'm going to try again and let it stay a little bit more. Generally what you would do is you would cover everything and then just start to wipe off the areas that you don't want it to be, which would be most areas. And just lower spots would kind of hold on to that color. The problem is there really are no low spots on this armor. Just gonna tap it and see if I can't leave some on there. I don't want any little brush stroke looking things, but not sure what that is or where it came from. I'm just kind of moving this around randomly. No rhyme or reason at this point. It's kind of trying to make some sense of it, but it really, there's not any other areas where there's a lot of the sand color on here or anything, so I'm not trying to match anything up. Now if I try to wipe that off, it's going to wipe it clean. I don't want that, so I'm just kind of tapping on it. If there's any areas that I don't like, then I can, rub that off. If you get color, you know, if you are doing it like this, where you're doing it on the flak jacket and everything, if you get some color on there, that's going to be fine, as long as you kind of get a rag and kind of smear it out. You don't want like a speck of this color on there, but if it just kind of a smear of it, it's going to be fine, especially if there's the same color up on the armor. So that's one technique. And I think what's going to work for us a little better is just more of a dry brush technique, or dry towel technique, or something to that effect. I'm use a little bit darker color. It's a burnt umber, not ember. I'm going to take just a cheap brush that I've got. So I'm going to load this up on my brush, and then I'm going to wipe almost all of it off, where there's just a ghost of it left. And then I'm just going to, you know, stab this in a few places. There's really no areas in this that would look like it would like really trap dirt or anything, so it's just going to be kind of randomly placed. I don't want anything that's very, not sure what the word, I don't want any sharp edges. I don't want anything that's like, here's a real obvious spot of color. I just want it to be just sort of an ambiguous dark area. So load my brush up again and then wipe it all off again. And if you mess up and it looks bad, you can always just get some green paint from the spray can you used and, you know, brush over the area you don't like. Getting an odd glare where I can't really see what I'm doing. Okay, it's getting a little too much of a pattern here, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of water. Let me see if I can just kind of blend this a little bit. I also have, this is just one of those little tubes, tools you can get at Home Depot or someplace like that. Any paint store is probably going to have some version of this. It's for getting a pattern. You just, you know, kind of stamp things out. I've just taken my finger and I've pulled, you know, little chunks out of it so that there's not a flat surface anywhere, or even a regular surface anywhere on here. I'm just going to stamp that into the paint. And then, just like I did with the card before, I'm just going to stamp down onto the cardboard until there's, you know, it's not a real dark. And then I can just kind of stamp this on here. Now notice that I'm turning it each time. You don't want a repeated pattern on there. You just want to kind of stamp and then turn it a little bit. Now you don't want to turn it while you're stamping, because then you'll get a little circle drawn on there, but stamp, turn, stamp, turn. I think I'm going to have to close the garage door because the glare is just too bright. Okay, this seems like it's working a little bit better. And this technique, I think, seems to be working the best of all. You don't want to kind of do everything. You just want to do a few spots. You don't want it to be real noticeable. This is getting a little bit dark here. So I'll see when everything dries. If I still don't like it, I might go in with some green maybe a little bit, just to tone that back a little bit. So we're good with that. I'm gonna get some more black color in here. I've got some raw umber and some, I've got ivory black, which is not as dark as the Mars black, but you could also use the Mars black. I'm not gonna try to clean the sponge or anything. I'm just going with one color on top of the other color. And I definitely want to get this corner because it's quite dark on Boba Fett, and it obscures part of this symbol. I know you might not be able to see you know, what I'm, the individual things, but hopefully you'll be able to see that it gradually is getting darker in certain areas. And I'm going to go to the black. I may end up taking this piece off and kind of dusting that corner from about 3 feet with a black spray paint. I think that's maybe what it takes to put a nice darkening back of this sticker without it looking so stippled. So I accidentally spun the brush a little bit while I was down. I got a little bit of a little smeared circle right there. I'm going to repeat that on this side over here a little bit just so that it's consistent. I don't want to get too crazy with this because this is, you know, supposed to look good in real life. This is not for a movie where everything has to be, you know, bigger and more contrasty. So I'm going to keep this a little bit more subtle. I'm going to let that completely dry, and then I'm going to come back with a little bit of this green color from the spray can, and I'll show you how to do that, and we'll tone some of this stuff that's a little bit intense back a little bit. I've just got, I don't know if it's, can you see here? I guess so. This is the same spray paint that we used to paint that with, and I've just got one of these little liners for, you know, a paint roller, and I'm just going to spray this. You can see this on camera. I'm just going to spray this into there. Preferably do this outside just because there's a lot of paint vapor. Doesn't necessarily need to be in your lungs. Okay, so now I've got the paint that I need, and I'm just using the same technique. Promise I can't see better from that side. Now with the green, you do want to make sure you don't get into the silver. Okay. And I'm just going to go over this. I'm going to try to feather the edges just a little bit, because the brushed paint has a little bit different texture, different reflective quality than sprayed paint. I'm just going to try to blend that out a little bit. One thing that I can do right now, this isn't really weathering, but it's something that doesn't need to get done. I'll take some of the black paint, and I just want to paint inside the little digital readout, whatever this is, little tag that says, "Hi, I'm Boba." We'll take it a step further a little bit later. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is some true dry brush technique. Just because I'm using a different kind of paint. This is a Rust-Oleum aluminum. It's an oil-based paint. So I probably should make sure that acrylic paint is completely dry. I think I'll do that real quick. So this is not the time that you want a real nice brush. I've got this rather beat up old oil brush that I've used for this a lot of times. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes it kind of fights me. So we'll just have to see how it works this time. And I'm gonna do that same dry brush technique. I'm gonna get some of that paint, aluminum paint, on my brush, and I'm just gonna wipe it off until there's almost nothing left. Okay, and once I get there, I can just take this onto some of the edges. I don't want to do a lot of the edges on his armor, but sometimes you can do diagonal this way, sometimes diagonally this way, sometimes straight up and down. Corners have a tendency to get just kind of dinged up a little bit. So we did the big damage earlier, but this is just little scratches from wear and tear, rubbing up against the other pieces of armor. When the paint's just about dry, where you're not getting much, that's when you can really get some of your best effects. And I'm just going to kind of go diagonally across some areas. Just from, he's crawling on the ground. Areas like across here, you're not going to usually get a lot of scratches here, but that's where the effect looks the best. Maybe down here I can get something. Maybe we're trying to get a little bit too dry at this point, so let's reload and wipe everything off again. I'm just wiping it until I don't have any solid areas of paint. It's all streaks. Yeah, this one piece in particular is going to be rubbing up against the other pieces all the time. This area where I really put a lot of scratches in over here, I'm going to make sure that I definitely knock the edges back all around it. It's already there naturally, but once again, we get these edges here that are going to be bumping in each other quite a bit. You have to be kind of careful because sometimes it doesn't look like anything's happening, but you change positions where the light's hitting it a little bit differently, and it's like really dramatic. You got a little bit too much paint on my brush there. That kind of effect is always nice where you just get, it's a very dry brush and you just kind of keep going in the same area until it just looks like the paint gets worn away. You don't want to do it a lot, but it's nice for some areas. It'd be nice to do somewhere in the middle here. That's where you seem like you'd be scraping on the ground a lot, but at the same time, it'd be very distracting from the rest of the armor, and I don't want to do that, so I won't. Now I'm going to go up here. I don't know if you can see the shoulders up here, but I'm doing the edge of the collar armor. This kind of effect really just kind of helps to sell the fact that it's some sort of metal. So there's that. So it's this kind of area here that really kind of sells that, helps to sell that metallic part. You can also see it right around here. This area here is particularly nice. Okay, and that's it for that. You want to go ahead and do that on all of the green armor, all of those steps. If it's easier for you to take it off the suit, then go ahead and take it off the suit and lay it down. I think we've pretty much decided that the kind of sponge technique, and you can actually just use a sponge. You don't have to do anything like this. In fact, you could get away with using just a watered up paper towel. Also works quite well for that. I'd say use that and the dry brush technique, and that's really what you're going to need. The wetter, diluting it down and putting it on, then wiping it off, that works a little better if there's lots of little grooves and things like that it can seep into and that doesn't get cleaned out. It really gives it a lot of depth. Don't really have that situation here, so I'd stick with the other two methods. But do the collar the back, the cod piece, the back piece, and all the front armor, just like we did, and you'll be good to go on the green. So let's take a look and see what we can do for the yellow. Let's get started on the yellowish parts here. And let me set your mind at ease. First of all, we're not going to need all of these paints. I just kind of grabbed every yellow, brown, gray color that I had because I'm not really sure, what colors I'm going to use at this point. But I do think that overall these are just way too intense, so I think I'm probably going to knock them back with some black spray paint. But before I do that, I'm going to do a little bit of work to this decal right here. I've just got some cadmium yellow. I could also use the spray paint like I did on the green and just spray it into the roller tray and use the color that way. But since I have this color, I'm going to use it. I'm going to use the dry brush technique first of all. I've got this same beat up brush that I used in the silver. I've just got some on my brush, get a little more, just a little bit more evenly. And I'm going to, wipe almost all of it off. And then I'm just going to hit some of these edges. I don't know how much of this you can see. I'm just trying to make this not look quite so much like a pristine sticker that I've stuck on here. I've gone over a little bit with that with this paint pen just to see how that would work. That actually worked pretty good, but it's you're not going to be able to get a dry brush effect with it. I wanted to do this first because I don't want to knock this color back a little bit. Then I won't have any color that I can kind of, distress the sticker with. You definitely don't want your distress marks to be a more intense color than the background color that you're trying to blend into. Okay. So with that out of the way, let me wipe this off. I'm going to go ahead and take all of these and just kind of hit them lightly. I'm not trying to hit any one area more than another. I'm just trying to take the overall color of them down in intensity a little bit. Okay, so I just have some of this flat black spray paint. And I'm going to stand back about 3 feet away from these and just kind of slightly kind of dust this toward them. If I get too much on the exposed silver parts, I can always go back over it with my silver pen and brighten those back up again. I'm going to try to avoid the dart projectors on here just because I don't want them to get too dark. Starting to get a little bit heavy there at the bottom, so I want to back up a little bit. Okay, this one's starting to get where I want it. Now let's move over to the shoulders. I should have waited a little bit longer. That yellow that I was painting on there is still apparently a little bit wet, and it's grabbing the paint more than the rest of it. So I'm going to stop on that and let that dry completely. Okay, it should be quite a bit drier than it was, at least. Flip those so you can see them a little better. Actually, this one's getting pretty close to where I want it. Okay, that one's like pretty dirty. So I think both the shoulder pieces are right where I want them. I do just a little bit more to the knees. It seems like they would be dirtier than the shoulders would be. Okay, I think that works. So I'll let these dry and then we can go on to the rest of the weathering process. Now that the paint's dry, I just want to take a paper towel and lightly go over this, because when you're dusting this, a lot of the stuff that's getting on there is actually already dry. So you can see some of it's coming off now. So I want to get rid of the stuff that's just, literally just dust on there. That's a little bright still. Maybe want to go back and do something about that. I'm going to take some of this burnt sienna. And I think I'll probably take a little bit of black. So I mix those up and they look pretty much like slightly warm black, really, to be honest. So you could probably get away with black. But it's definitely warmer than just a cold black would be. But I would just call this a combination of the burnt sienna and some black. And I'm just going to take my little sponge, load it up, wipe 95% of it off, and then kind of go after these brighter areas here, turning in between each time I touch. It's actually a little bit, I'm getting lots of little dots. I really don't want it to be that intense, to be honest. It's not bad, it just looks a little bit artificial. Let's see if we can't work on that a little bit. Gonna take some of my cadmium yellow medium hue. Okay, that looks a little better now. Looks a little bit more natural. Okay, I'm fairly happy with that. Let that dry for a while, and I'm going to cover this one. I've got the same issue where I didn't get enough paint. I'm going to go back in with the darker again, but this time I'm going to make sure that I get a lot more paint off. And wipe until there's almost no paint on there at all. Now I can start. So it looks a little better than it did before, where we got a little bit dark. It's okay if you want to do some directional smears also. Okay, now let that dry as well. Truth be told, I really prefer the effect that you get from the black spray paint. I might just hit that in a few key areas. So I think I'm just going to dust it with the black spray paint like I did before, but I'm just going to concentrate on sort of this area here and then sort of down below here. Okay, so here it is now. We just, well, it looks way darker on camera than it does in real life along there. But I've just kind of dusted this area. I did get a little bit heavy there, so I may come back with some of that yellow and kind of try to blend that out a little bit. So it's kind of the same thing. I want to kind of try to hit this area here, and then also a little bit more. We've already got quite a bit there, maybe a little bit more here along the side. And then, you know, a little bit here as well. Okay, and once again, it looks way darker on camera than it does in real life. It's maybe a little bit dark there. I may want to blend that out a little bit, but I like it everywhere else. It looks pretty good. So I'm gonna let this dry, and then I'm gonna go back over those couple areas that are just really seem kind of dark, and just gonna hit them with some of the cadmium yellow deep hue and see if I can blend that back a little bit, and then we'll go on from there. Okay, this is dry now, and still got this. I've just got some cadmium yellow deep hue. Seems to be much more yellow than, maybe I should get the stuff out of the can real quick, because that's definitely standing out. Let me try a little dry brush technique real quick, see if I can't get that smoothed out a little bit better. I think maybe for the yellow pieces, dry brush technique's probably going to be a little bit more effective, whereas with the green, the sponge technique is more effective. I think I'm gonna have to go back and dust this one last time with the black from a good distance, just because everything else is kind of a speckled pattern, and now I've got these sort of brush effects. I mean, to be honest, it looks fine. In fact, it's not a bad effect. I kind of like the way that little stronger color there. It looks more worn. So you know what? I think I'm not going to mess with it. I'm going to leave it just the way it is. I'm kind of splitting hairs over some of this stuff. It actually looks good. It's just not what I was intending to do. So I think maybe I'll just, sometimes you got to know when to stop. It actually looks good. It's just not what I was intending. So happy accident maybe. So I'm going to let this dry, and then we'll do the last step on here. Okay, everything's dry now, and I guess you can probably guess what we're going to do now. I've got my aluminum paint and my terrible torn up brush. I think I'd start here, I guess. Okay. And let's see, this part up here, I guess, is opposite some armor. So we'll do a little bit of wear here. Like I said before, it's really difficult sometimes to do these because the light's got to be just right. Because it can look like nothing's happening, and then you look at a different angle. Corners are always a good place. Got to test this area out right here. We'll do a similar thing maybe right here. Okay, and as it turns out, I'm about to run out of power. So I'm going to let this all dry a little bit more, and then when I've charged up my phone, we'll do the rest of it. So it's the next morning, and the phone is charged, and I've got better light, and so we can go ahead and proceed. I'm just going to do the same basic thing. Mostly I'm going to go for the corners and a little bit along the edges. Don't forget to do, don't just do this top edge. Don't forget this entire edge probably needs to have a little bit of paint dings and wear on it. For the corners, it's pretty good. You just kind of stab at it. Gives you a nice spot on both sides. Got just a little bit too much paint on my brush at this point, I think. You have to be careful on areas where you've got a ding already, because if you get the silver on that obvious raised area, it's going to kind of kill the effect. The effect is usually a little bit better if you have to go back over it a lot of times to get it to show up than if you barely touch it and you get a bright shiny area. They can both work, but it's kind of a different feel. One looks like a worn spot and one looks more like a gouge or a scratch. In this case, it seems to be working pretty well if I hit it, not with the tips of the brush, but just kind of hit it with the back edge. You just kind of have to experiment as you go. The end's definitely going to have quite a bit of scratch on it, because that's where it's kind of sticking out into the air and it's going to be hitting stuff all the time. This has got a little bit of a rounded edge, so it doesn't work quite as well. I think it'll work on one of those kind of worn spots there. Up here where I've got some nice edge stuff, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of scratch up some of this end. Don't get too carried away with it. If you have just a uniform shiny edge, it's not going to read as wear or damage. This I want to be kind of a dry brush look to it, where it just looks like some very thin scratches. I'm doing it right along this edge where it bends. There you go, you can see that. Just kind of following this kind of shape down here a little bit. I feel like I should probably get some of this in somewhere in this graphic here. I'm just not sure where I want to do it yet. There. That actually looks pretty good. I think I'll leave it with that. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. I think I'll go ahead and... all those edges are wet, so I don't want to just lay it down. It's a little bit harder because it's such a curved surface and there's not really an edge. I can get a little bit more paint off my brush. It's a little bit, I just barely touch it and I'm getting marks. So I want to get some of that paint off so I can just kind of do a little bit of a scratch across there, just where it changes directions. Probably again up here a little bit. And of course this back edge is going to get some wear on it. It's much better light for me, but I think it's worse for the camera. Especially if I don't put it on, if I don't actually aim the camera at it. It's a fairly complex shape, and by hitting all these edges, it kind of helps to define it. We've got a little bit too much of a uniform scratch here. I'm going to go back with some other directional. See if I can't break that up just a little bit. There we go, that's a little better. You have to kind of give up the idea that you're going to have control over this process. You're kind of just letting the brush do all the work. And if you don't have any preconceived notions of what it's going to look like, you'll find that you're almost always pretty darn happy with the result. If you try to make it do a specific thing that you want it to do, it's going to be a lot more frustrating. Which I'm sure is exactly why, you know, the paintwork on Return of the Jedi looks different than the weathering on Empire Strikes Back. And all the different helmets that were used in both movies, for that matter. I think this would be a good area to have some of that. Just kind of diagonal wear scratches. There we go. Got a little bit of a drip. I do not want to get this silver on there because you can't have a drip and, you know, the metal shining through the drip at the same time. So let's fix that. Definitely going to want some scraping through here. And get the corners just like on the other pieces. Lighting's definitely worse for you being able to see stuff. Even though this is a fairly dull paint, the yellow, orange, I mean, it's still catching enough of a shine that it's kind of hiding the work that I'm doing, especially to the camera. I just have to believe that there'd be scratches across the front of this. I think that's probably a little overkill. I probably should have just done 1 or 2. This is starting to look a little bit like someone went crazy with a paintbrush. So I may have to cover some of that up. Once that dries, I'll go back with the cadmium yellow and then dust it with some more black. Because I think that's probably just a bit too much. You know, oftentimes, you know, less is more. You can do quite a bit on the edges, but when you start to get in the middle of it, it's, you know, you definitely run the risk of making it look more like paint than scratches. Okay, I think it looks pretty good other than this part. Makes it a little taller for these. I'm going to do pretty much the exact same things on this one, minus all the stuff in here. This area will be constantly rubbing up against the flight suit, so I can only assume that this would have quite a bit of wear on it. Got a little bit too much paint. There we go, now it's looking more like something's been rubbing on it. And while I've got this in sort of the right amount of paint to do the wear, let's go ahead and wear down one of these corners here. Every so often you can give it a little, I don't know if you even see that, maybe those down here is a good place. Something hit it or it hit something. So again, these areas where it's constantly been rubbing up against the flight suit, and give it a little bit more wear there. Not so much scratches, but just sort of that look of the paint's been worn off of it. I kind of like that. Now I can see where there's a big kind of a drip there. I may have to fix that later. So these areas where I can definitely see where there's multiple layers of paint, kind of a look to it. Don't want to do a lot of scratches there just because it's not going to look right. I can do maybe some scratches in the lowest part of it. Okay, and I'm going to put a couple of scratch areas right in the middle of the front, but just a couple. Okay. And I mean, that's a couple of these areas to go ahead and kind of wear across the two different edges. Okay, and that is the last bit of weathering on here. So we'll let all this dry, and I'm going to go back and repair some of the scratches that we did on here. And then that really should be it. Once this all dries, I'll put everything together and we can take a look at the overall picture. Almost forgot one last thing, and that is the display here on the left chest piece of his armor. And as you can probably see, I've already gone with a pencil and gone in and drawn the pieces that I want to do. Now this is one of the actual sequence of displays. There are about 5 or 6 different things that come up on his display. I picked this one because it's not something that you can actually read. One of the things looks like dupe or something like that, and so I didn't want to do that. I want it to be more just sort of random. And I have my liquid chrome pen again. It's the very fine point pen. So you have to be careful with this type. It has a tendency to, when you're first priming it, it'll make a big blob. It'll just run all around the outside of the point and make a big blob. So make sure you do that on a piece of paper away from this, because the last thing you want is a giant big ball of, looks like mercury sitting there. But if you do get a ball like that on a piece of paper, you can kind of dip the tip of it in there and it'll help it to start working. And I'm going to start right in the middle, and it's basically a number 2, and start in right in the middle of your slot. And then another line at the top. You know how to do it too, actually. Given those old style digital numbers like you see on an old scoreboard. Then go all the way to the far right, and it's a 1, but it's made up of 2 parts. So start at the top. I'm going all the way pretty much as far to the right as I can go, and go halfway down and leave a gap, and then go the rest of the way down. If you're having trouble with that, you can always just do one line and then go back later with the black marker and, put a little black mark in between. Now go to the far left, and it's an H. Once again though, it's going to be, instead of one line that goes from the top to the bottom, it's broken into 2 parts. And this is going to be difficult. I'm going to have to hold this so I can see better. And then the center part just doesn't quite go all the way across. Okay, now in between those two, the reason I'm doing it in this order to get the spacing, make it easier. Now directly between the H and the 2 is what looks like a 5, but without the top piece that goes across. not the best one, but it'll work. And I can go back with the black marker and kind of clean that up a little bit. And then in between the 2 and the 1, we get a 9. Okay, and then on the far left, we're going to get 4 just a line from top to bottom. Oh, see, I hate when that happens. I touched the edge of the pen tip and it pulled a big blob of ink down. So let me see if I can clean that up. I mean, worst case, I'll have to paint this top little bit black again, and then I'll put the silver on top of it a second time. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry, and then I'll come back with some black, and I'll go ahead and fill in that again and clean up this weird 5 thing. Okay, so I went ahead and used that Mars black and repainted that inside there. Cleaned up the inside of this just a little bit with a Sharpie. This seems to be just the right depth that it's going to catch that paint pen and make it, you know, glob a bunch of ink out. So I'm just going to use this little brush here. I'm going to use a glob of the ink from the paint pen that when I first primed it, it blobbed out on. So okay, so I'm gonna let this dry and then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, everything's dry and we're ready for the next step. This is just the, how do I describe this? This is where you'd put a tab for a title on a file for a filing cabinet. I'm assuming that's focused. So yeah, this would just go into a folder for that you would see in a filing cabinet. I guess it goes this way. So you're going through your files and you have a label right here. You can also just use any kind of red plastic that you have. This just seems like it's easy to get, and you know, a lot of people will have it. I just pulled this directly out of my filing cabinet. The hard part's going to be holding this in position while I trace the size of it. I'm going to do some trimming before I start marking it. This will just let it lay flat. I want to mark it as close as I can because I'm just going to try to fit it inside the rectangle here. And the better job you did when you were cutting it out originally, you know, the rectangle, the easier things are going to be now. Okay, I'm afraid I'm going to have to pull this away from the camera just so that I can see better. Okay, this looks pretty good. I'm going to attempt to cut this out. I'm going to try to err on the side of too big. Okay. Let's see how well that worked. Okay, this is just a little bit too big or too long. I'm going to trim a tiny bit off. It is probably still going to be too big, but we'll go with baby steps here. So there it is, like that. It's not quite as good as having an LED, but it does, you know, show up. And in flash photography, this is going to look better than an LED, so there's an advantage there. I just need to make another strip to go in the top area. Okay, I think I finally have it the right size. Okay. There we have it. Now, in order to secure that in place, we're just going to use a little bit of super glue. Okay, finally, there we have it. So why don't we take a look at things a little bit closer so we can really appreciate the difference that weathering makes. Now I know that on camera and in direct sunlight like this, there are some areas that look a bit much, and I may go back with the green and tone things down a little bit. But all in all, I think even without that, it looks pretty good. In fact, the aluminum paint especially does an excellent job of selling the overall metal quality of the armor. So that's pretty much it for Boba Fett's armor. In the next video, we'll talk about some of the extra little bits that go along with it. Hey, if you liked this video or found it helpful, why not go ahead and give it a thumbs up? And of course, subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the upcoming videos. You can also click that little bell so you'll be instantly notified when new videos come out. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them down below in the comments section and I'll do my best to answer them. You know, it's really your likes, comments, and subscriptions that motivate me to keep this channel going. So until next time, thanks.